All right, y'all. So I watched Darth Microtransactions YouTube video last night before I passed out regarding Last Epoch, and it's titled right there. I played Last Epoch Endgame. Is it any good? I started playing this game over a year ago, and I've taken some time off of it. I played D2, D4, PoE, and Torchlight. So I have a lot of experience in these games, and I just wanted to comment on a couple of things that Darth brought up. Big respect to Darth because he's doing it. He's grown a lot, and I watch a lot of his videos. I like a lot of his content, as well as like guys like asmongold and Rax and everyone. And sometimes these guys share stuff that's more the popular opinion. I kind of just wanted to put in my 2 cents, and there's some stuff I definitely agree with too. So, anyways, we'll get into it.
Last Epoch's in-game. Is it any good? Let's talk about it. When you hear in-game of Last Epoch discussed, you're pretty much always going to be hearing about the monolith system.
I'm going to jump through this just because this is the TLDR version. I did want to jump ahead a little bit right here where he gets into some gameplay. He's going to explain the monoliths, and you can, check that out if you haven't already, but I'm here to talk about the end game. I just wanted to make a comment about specifically the mob density. So you'll see him jump through right here.
Both void spires. If you see, it marks on the map these circles for me, so I know exactly where to go. Very often your gameplay will look something like this, which is running past, or if you have a build like a whirlwind bar build or something, killing them on the go. But for me,
so what you saw there is essentially what you're going to see through the whole game if you haven't played it. You're probably watching this because you have interest in the end game, and maybe you're playing through right now, or you just want to see what people's opinions are on the end game. In my opinion, the mob density affects, the gameplay drastically through the whole game, right? And when you get to end game, your character's all geared up. You want to be fighting against a ton of mobs, and that's something that D4 did a good job with in regards to their launch to where the state of the game is now. There's tons of mob density, and it makes for good gameplay. D4 has some other issues, but with Last Epoch, I know the devs have mentioned that they can't do anything about the mob density. It's based on the engine. Hopefully, as the game goes on and gets more and more development, they're able to change it or adjust the engine. But I imagine that they would have already done that if they could. But later in the video, you'll see the other points that Darth is making about the end game specifically. However, I just wanted to bring this up because I think that this is a huge piece that needs to be figured out.
So I'm going to make room in the inventory. Holy moly, hold on 1 second here. Kill these guys before I die. So make room in the inventory in order to actually get this item. Should have made room earlier. Okay, so there's an item. Now I'm going to continue and pick up gold. This is a pretty good example of a run because this is more or less what my runs look like. Kind of running through, click on any of the shrines that there may be, get to the end. Every now and then you're going to see one of these. These are...
So my thing with running through the dungeon in regards to like how the whole system is designed is like, all right, well, if I have to just run through a bunch of dungeons in order to increase the corruption, that's not ideal. That doesn't really make sense. It's kind of clanky, right? Clunky. What would be better is if, say you get to a higher level and you're way stronger than the mobs you're fighting right now based on your gear and your build setup and everything, you should be able to automatically tier up the difficulty without having to go through this monotonous grind of, all right, I have to level up all my stability and then I have to level up my corruption so that these mobs are more difficult. So in my humble opinion, I would change the system so that you could automatically scale that difficulty and reward earlier on without having to grind through that monolith. Right now, as it is, you have to essentially just go through a bunch of chains of monoliths in each of those different areas or level of difficulties in order to be able to progress the difficulty and progress and improve the rewards.
Exiled mages or exiled dudes that give you bonus experience. we normally would have, and I will receive the rewards that were marked by the map. So if I go here, these are the ones that were marked as the reward, and then this is just a normal chest that you get after doing any of them. So that reward in that first chest, for instance, I have more bar up here. Second bar is as you go through stability, it's going to unlock these quests. There will be 3 different quests to do. Once you've done all of the quests, effectively done enough of the monolith instances in order to get enough stability to unlock and do these quests, then I can go to the next monolith, which will be a higher level monolith. You continue this process over and over and over again. If you're wondering what the quests themselves are, very often it's something very similar, like another map with another type of objective. And then the last one is typically a boss fight, and the boss fights can be rather enjoyable. So we're loading into the Echo. One of the things I will mention about the game is you do get loading time issues sometimes, but I've heard that they are working on that. So if you go here, this is another one where there's multiple objectives. So I will find some guys at the end of this, and I'm not going to complete this full one for the sake of the video, but if you can see there's a question mark over there, and there's a question mark down there, I have to go talk to those 2 people and completed these ones. So once you have done these monoliths and you continue to do these monoliths over and over and over again, then you get to the opportunity to empower your monoliths. This is the monolith map, and what I was talking about, how you start with monoliths and then they go harder and harder. For instance, 58 is the first one, then 62, 70, etc. You can kind of pick your direction through here to the different monoliths, and you can start them. So you can go to one of the monoliths you might enjoy. If you notice down here, it says increased ring shard drop rate. If I look at this one, this is resistance drop rate. So when you complete those Echo quests that I was telling you about here on the left-hand side, when you're in one of these, then you get a reward associated. Corruption also increase no maximum corrupt of these instances here. We'll have like a boss option, your quest, the required quest Echo in the shade. You can go through and you can continue, which gives you basically better and better loot. It is an infinite, a recursive type of grind. You're going to continue to do these maps over and over again, get more rewards associated with them, and then they are going to be gaining stronger affixes and becoming more difficult, and the boss can have RNG related affix, etc. So basically, if you're wondering what the in-game grind is like in last Epoch from a monolith standpoint, which is one of the only things that I've seen people talk about, really, it is a instanced over and over again. They get stronger and stronger, and that has a no ceiling to it. Imagine this sort of like nightmare dungeons from Diablo 4 with no ceiling cap and with a little bit more variety in terms of you being able to pick which way you want to go, with the added bonus of being able to target farm things because of the way the reward system happens, and also, in my opinion, better bosses, because the bosses can be quite cool. I will say I find the monolith system to be, in its current iteration, not that exciting, if I'm being bluntly honest.
That's a fact. And all of the mini bosses that you fight throughout the different ones, most of them are different, but a lot of them are really basic fights. And it feels very like single A, double A quality gameplay. I know this game's trying to compete against D4 and PoE, and a lot of people are like super excited for it, and it is a fun game to play, but the mechanics of the boss fights have to improve. There's a couple of really good boss fights in the game, like in the dungeon that I was going to talk about in a little bit, but overall, it's really mundane gameplay, and I'd say the biggest or the most enjoyment comes from changing up your character and being able to build different characters, and it doesn't take a lot of time to level each character to the end game, so you can do multiple characters without getting burnt out. But the monolith system is very redundant, and I absolutely agree that it needs to be fleshed out a little bit more.
With you guys, that does not mean that I am completely unaware that the devs themselves have said that one of their first focuses will be to improve this system. This is something that apparently most people that have been playing the game a long time tend to agree with, which is that the monolith system is all right. It's not a huge detraction from the game, but it's also not a giant selling point of the game either.
I think it's a really good idea, and what Diablo tried to do with target farming is create hell tides. And hell tides are cool, but the loot is not good enough. Last Epoch has a great loot system in regards to drop rates and the variability of items you can get. You can get rares and uniques and not legendaries, but exalted items for all different types of classes as you're playing one class, which is really cool. And then you can throw in your loot filter and just focus on your character, or you can make a loot filter for other characters that you want to farm for. So really, you don't need to farm items on your character that you're going to level. You could literally just farm it on your main, which is really cool. That being said, the redundancy of the monolith is what's the problem.
In my own personal opinion, it's if the monolith system was the only thing I felt like I was engaging with in terms of working on my characters, then I would in fact feel like it is a detractor. But it is not the only thing that I'm doing in the in-game. I want to give you an example. There are legendary items that have potential. For instance, this item right here has legendary potential. So what the legendary potential allows me to do is to take an item of similar
stuff that he talks about. Here he's going to talk about the dungeons that are in game that are separate from the monoliths, and he has some good points here too.
Monolith, go out, work on your gear, try to get lucky with the RNG-based crafting type of system, see what happens there. There's also other dungeons that break up this monolith gameplay loop, and I actually think the dungeons are one of the better parts of the game. So for instance, there are multiple tiers of dungeons that go up to the highest level in the game, so you are not stuck to just doing monoliths, and there is reason to do the dungeons. So if you go here, for instance, this is the Lightless Arbor. Now you can go into the Lightless Arbor with the key that you get from doing the monoliths, and the dungeon itself has multiple tiers. You can see tier 4 I have yet to unlock. There's tier 1, 2, 3, and they go up to level 100, which basically ramps the difficulty of them. The dungeons are well done, in my opinion, because there are mechanics associated with.
But there's only 3 of them right now. And with this game launching out of early access, only 3 dungeons really limits, you know, what you're going to do. You're either going to do monoliths, or you're going to do the dungeons, or you're going to do the arena. With the dungeons, 2 of them really aren't that essential. You can get good loot from them, and they give you an opportunity to get more loot, but really you don't necessarily need to do them because you can't target farm with them as well. You can like select, you know, certain upgrades where you spend gold to get certain items dropped or higher chances for them to get dropped, but it takes longer, and you have to, you know, especially for the higher level tiers, they're more difficult than just going through the monoliths and target farming that way.
With the dungeons, for instance, if I go into the dungeon itself, there are 3 current dungeons in the game. I actually wish there was more. When I go into the dungeon, you're going to notice I have this mechanic of this light here. Now you can.
He's going to go through all the dungeons. I'm going to give you the TLDR version of it. I'll just skip to the end where he gets to the boss and the loot.
Our reward for the end of the dungeon. You have a stash here, which will allow me to store items that I might have acquired from it. Then I have the vault, and I can see adds a chest that drops several items, so I can accept what I want to do with my gold. Yes, okay, I accept. Adds a chest that drops a rare helmet, and you can see it costs more and more gold, and you get different items. All items from every chest have a chance to be duplicated, and you can see my gold here. It's getting more and more expensive. Runes of Shattering, now 83%. Drops many runes and glyphs. Yes, I want that. Drops 15% more items. Multiplicative. Adds a chest to drop several rare items. So you can basically go.
So you can see that a lot of that is RNG, whereas with the monoliths, you can target farm. But the monoliths get really redundant, right? So this is kind of like your way to change it up and still get good loot and, you know, just get a change of pace. But this is not the quintessential dungeon you got to do. It's going to be the Temporal Sanctum that he talks about later.
And take as many of these modifiers as you want. This is almost like there are your rewards, and now you're going to get yourself your rewards. And then obviously we have the stash in which we can take all these rewards, put away what
does this look like? This looks like the D4 vault. I don't know if you guys have played it or not, but when you go in and you do a vault in D4, it's the newest season dungeon mechanic. It looks a lot like this once you open up all the boxes. So I never really thought about that until now. Um, but just looking at this image right here, it definitely makes me think of D4 and how they're trying to keep up, which is funny because D4's problems are totally different than other games' problems, and the developers just don't realize that.
We want, throw away the stuff we don't want. So I think this is a pretty cool example of how the dungeons are well done. The Temporal Sanctum has you swapping between timelines in order to defeat the boss with its in-game mechanic. The Soulfire Bastion has you almost doing as Simon Says of swapping between red and green in order not to die to the dungeon mechanics and survive the boss. And there is rewards associated with them. The Temporal Sanctum lets you do the legendary.
The bosses are okay. They're really simple. And the movement is getting better in the game, and most classes, actually all the classes, have some sort of movement ability. So it's not hard to dodge stuff, but just things still feel clunky. And I definitely think that, this is more of a gameplay thing and not an end game thing, but improving the gameplay is going to improve the end game as well a little bit. And hopefully that we'll see that in, future updates.
Potential I was explaining earlier, and the Soulfire Bastion is another way of sort of gambling souls that you collect along from the dungeon in order to target farm down the exact item slots that you might want to be upgrading. My bummer about the dungeon is they are well done enough to the point that I wish there was more of them. As it stands, there are only the 3 I mentioned. However, there is one other thing in the game which seems to me like it might actually be the true in-game other than the monolith. Let me show you. Every now and then you're going to get a key called an arena key. The arena key allows you at an area called Champion's Gate to begin a wave sort of horde-based mode that allows you to go all the way to limitless. For instance, if I put in a normal key, it just starts in normal, but you can also acquire arena key of memory, which begins with 100 waves already completed. Just so you know, there's ways to do it. So I can enter the arena. Now you're going to notice there's tier 1, tier 2, there's going to be tier 3 and 4, but there's also the endless arena, which is a level 100 arena that allows you to climb a leaderboard based upon how far you're actually able to go. And you can see scales from your character level to level 100 over the first 80 waves. And then after that point, it's just going to continually go over and over and over and over again. I actually think this is the coolest mode in the game.
So it's a cool little concept, but when I was watching this, what I didn't understand is when he said it's his favorite part of the game, when, this whole video, essentially the TLDR is that the game has a very redundant end game. Yeah, you can run your monoliths and then change it up with the dungeons, and then you can also do the arena. But the arena is essentially the same thing, except the mobs are coming to you, right? The leaderboard and being able to get as far as you can is really cool, but this really shouldn't be like a, uh, I guess, advertised feature as something that's like really cool for the end game, and it's not the only thing. So, they don't make it a huge part of the end game advertisement, but it's one of the only few things that you can do. So, I think they need to flesh out the dungeons and the monolith more. Keep this as like a little side thing that people can do, but the reality is only like people that want to be at the very top of the leaderboard are going to do this a ton, or maybe you want to go in there and you want to see how well your build does. Sure, that's cool, but it is just what it is. It's literally just killing a bunch of mobs. And going back to what I said earlier in the video, going back to what I said earlier in the video, and going back to what I was saying earlier in the video, the mob density is just not there. It really isn't there. So, these mobs will get more difficult, but there's finite amount of mobs and they trickle out. And, yeah, if you kill some slower, more mobs will spawn before you kill them. And then there will be a decent amount of mobs around you. But the reality is that the mob density just isn't there for it to have that crazy, fun, hectic gameplay that, you might like in D4 or Path of Exile. So something to keep in mind.
In my own personal opinion. So we load into the arena, and then what the arena allows us to do here, this is a level 87 arena because my character is level 87 and it will scale exactly like I said earlier, is the mode is just going to start and there it says slay waves of enemies. That's all you really got to worry about. They're going to come to me. Now, there also will be shrines on the screen that we can pick up for each of the different areas. You can see it went from wave 1 to wave 2. If you look top right, you'll see the waves will get progressively harder, and I can pick up these shrines. There's only so many of them per area. Continue the wave until we get to wave 3, and then wave 4, wave 5, etc.
This is the flow of the mobs that you'll experience in the arena in general. Yeah, there will be higher tiers where you get a little bit more mob density, but essentially it looks just like this. And what it comes down to is your ability to be able to kill them fast enough.
Etc. Eventually we'll get to wave 40, and there will be a champion we need to defeat that can have even better rewards. If you're wondering why I'm one-shotting everything, that's sort of what my build is supposed to do. Okay, wave 5 completed, and then we can either abandon the run or attempt harder waves. I'm going to attempt harder waves. So it starts pretty mild, but then you get more and more and more minions, and they become stronger and stronger. Wave 10, collect your loot and press onwards. So then if you look on the map here, you're going to notice there are chests here I can collect, which is basically my loot for this portion. I can get it, and I can continue to even harder waves, which would take me to a different map. Now that we're on wave 10, and we would do this sort of over again. Now, a couple of things you might be thinking when you're looking at this. I don't like standing still. I prefer blasting through my maps. Well, the arena mode might not be for you. I actually quite enjoy the portion of like them coming to me. This is one of my favorite parts of it, but it's probably not for everybody. The other part...
I'm glad you brought that up because I'm definitely that person that likes to go into different environments and, you know, explore stuff and go through maps, right? This is definitely not my mode, so I'm a little biased on the other side of things. Whereas, you know, Darth really likes this this mode, so I'm curious what his thoughts are on, you know, the mob density and whatnot, because someone that's, you know, being someone that's put a lot of time into this game, I definitely have noticed over time that I'm like, man, I could use some more mobs. I could enjoy this a little bit more if I had more going on the screen. But I've also noticed that, you know, with, you know, I have a pretty high-end computer. Even when they're the most mobs I've seen on the screen at once, and then all the spell effects going on, I've noticed that the game gets a little clunky. So I don't know if that's the game engine or what, but my computer can run games at like 300 FPS, like Call of Duty and whatnot. So, and Diablo at, you know, 150, 160 FPS. So I imagine it's something to do with the game engine, which obviously the devs have already talked about. But that might be a hindrance for the game long term.
Part of it is you might not care about a leaderboard or endless waves, but I do think it is cool to have that opportunity in the game. And it seems to me like a good way of being able to see exactly how strong your build is. And that's when we're going to talk about what, in my opinion, is the funnest part of the game when you get to in-game, which is sort of min-maxing your build, crafting, and diversifying your characters. Basically making either new characters or swapping from one build to another and figuring out exactly how to get your build exactly the way you want it, because it's pretty easy to respec. Since I've been playing the game, my paladin that I picked has swapped builds 3 different times, and it was never an issue to do so. I swapped originally from running like Smite Shield to like a 2-handed Warpath, which is like Whirlwind Barb, and then back to a shield with no weapon, Judgment kind of One Punch Man style of thing here. And you can do this very easily by respecking your passive points. I mentioned this in my previous video, but the respecking drop, so it will start me at level 4 as you level the other ability in case you are min-maxing things. For me, I had to change my gear once I got these. What resistances I had, I needed to change, etc. Character going into the end game. It doesn't have, let's say, the depth of the mapping system Path of Exile does. It does actually have, while it doesn't have into the end game, because I didn't feel like, oh no, now I have to make a new character. So currently in the iteration of the game, while it doesn't have, let's say, the depth of the mapping system Path of Exile does, it does actually have an easier way for you to take your same character and do different styles of builds and diversity, even if the amount of things to do in the game is less. So there is some yin yang to it. In its current iteration, I think if the game launches exactly as it is with the updates mentioned, that people will enjoy the game significantly. Eventually, in a week or two, we're going to get towards the in-game system, and I think people will become bored with the monolith system. Now, you might ask yourself, well, hey, ARPGs are basically in-game games, and if the in-game is, in your opinion, like a 6 out of 10, maybe a 7 out of 10, isn't that not a good enough situation? And we are right back into the issue of Diablo 4 having no in-game. It could be, but my answer to this is that the core skeleton of what this game is starting at a much higher base. For instance, for at the launch of the game. The way that the skill and passive tree works is phenomenal. The monolith system, while I think they need to flesh it out more, and I'll talk about how in just a moment, is set up significantly better with both the pathing systems, as well as the way to level to 100, as well as the target farming ways of having it, as well as having the stability quest reward function of it, so that the variety you are experiencing can very easily ramp up very quickly by them adding more activities within each of the instances. For instance, the one I showed you earlier where I opened it up and there was like an exiled mage in there, all they have to do is start adding more basically season mechanics into it, as opposed to just adding a higher tier nightmare dungeon or something. All they have to do is juice up a little bit of the variety within the system they've already created. Effectively, what I'm saying is the core game is good, has a good skeletal structure, and with the seasons, basically the cycles is what they're calling them in this game, it will be very easy for them to add into the monolith system more variety with whatever cycle-based mechanics they choose to add going into the game's future. I think this is a great base. If this was what it was going to be forever, and they were not already mentioning that they're focused on the monolith in-game system, if the game was not just now coming out and we're years down the road, or if we didn't have the season base in which can add in variety to the monolith system, I would say the in-game, in my opinion, is lacking. As it stands.
So one thing I wanted to mention is that this game has been out for a while. Yes, it is going to be released on the 21st as a full launch, right? But the game's been in early access. And PoE, they had years of development too, where the game got better and better, right? So while, the game has a lot to develop on, the game has been out for long enough to where it's like, oh man, this should have been done, right? So I don't want to discredit the developers, but I think that, and maybe they're working with a small staff, which they more than likely are, but at this point, I personally think that this is something that should have already been figured out, especially if you're launching on Steam. You've been advertising the launch, you have people talking about it. This is definitely something that should have been changed for launch. So I'm curious to see how it's going to play out when the game gets 6 months down the road. He says a couple of years. I think it's going to be either 6 to 8 months before people figure out if this is the game for them or not, or at least for them to decide if they want to take a break or not. Because I know that me being a player that's played this game for a while, that I'm definitely ready for something new, or I'm definitely ready for some new content. So hopefully when they launch the game, they come out with a cycle pretty quick.
I think it will be fine for the release, and within a cycle or two, they're going to have more variety, most likely, in it. And if the other side of the dungeons were not good, if this was all there was, I again would be saying it is lackluster, but the dungeons are quite enjoyable. And if the crafting system with the legendary potential and the ease of changing your builds was not in the game, I once again would be saying that the in-game is lackluster. But because we can have that variety in the game, I think it is a good skeletal structure. The game is still worth $35, in my opinion. This is not a $70 quadruple A game. It is correctly priced. I think you'll enjoy your time getting the monoliths. Then I think you'll enjoy your time in monoliths, and a couple weeks on the same character without changing your build and just grinding monoliths, you will become bored. That is my personal opinion in the game's current iteration. I feel like I'm being fair. I have the last Epoch devs have been on my podcast I do with Ghazi, and they're coming again on the podcast on Monday. So if you...
That last piece right there, I think he's giving a little bit more credit because he is working with the devs and having them coming on the podcast, and he's already met with them once. So I get it. but I think that there needs to be a little bit more criticism for the game's state. You know, it's in early access, so I get it. But for the full launch coming up, people are, you know, buzzing about this game, trying to figure out if it's going to be, you know, what the plan for it to be is. And ultimately, I think there needs to be a little bit more critiquing on it than, you know, oh, it's probably going to be pretty good. The end game is rough right now, and that's just the truth of it. You know, I'd say the best part of the game right now is being able to make ults quickly and picking up gear on your main and being able to try all these different builds. That last Epoch is really great. Thanks for checking out the video. Please give me a subscribe. Check out my Twitch. Also check out my TikTok. I've been posting videos and going to be putting up more content. Thanks for watching.
Would like to see me interview them, you can come to the live stream. I have the link down below to my live streams as well. You're welcome to come.